You should switch to Linux now. That's a statement that you've seen on a couple YouTube videos by now, I'm sure. I do agree that it will benefit a lot of people to switch to Linux, but I think that's too big of a blanket statement to be applied to everybody. I do think many of you should consider switching to Linux, but ultimately nobody can make that decision whether it's perfect for you than you after you've tried it a little bit. So I want to give you some tips and insight from my point of view on what it's like to switch to Linux and what you can do to prepare yourself to possibly switch to Linux. But first, I want to talk about the sponsor for today's video, SKILLSHARE. SKILLSHARE is a sponsor of this channel, but I've used SKILLSHARE for a long time. SKILLSHARE has countless amazing classes on all kinds of creative tools, on creative skills that I've relied on heavily. A lot of the tools I use on Linux have classes about them on SKILLSHARE. For example, Inkscape is an app that I rely on heavily. There's a class I just discovered called Inkscape Deep Dive from Brandon Grant.
Hi, welcome to the Inkscape Deep Dive course. In this course, we'll be using the free and open source vector graphics editor known as Inkscape to create digital artwork.
Although I've used Inkscape pretty successfully so far, making my thumbnails and some logos and things like that, I still have a lot to learn and know that I can maximize that software by learning more. And SKILLSHARE is one amazing resource for me to expand my knowledge in that area and a whole bunch of other areas. SKILLSHARE has thousands of classes in areas of illustration, design, animation, film, photography, and more. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive 20% off their first year of SKILLSHARE. Get started today. So I'm going to give you my insight and perspective as a creative person, specifically filmmaker, photographer, who made the switch to Linux about a year ago. I've been a professional video editor for over 20 years. I've used a lot of the major professional video editing applications, and I'm also a pretty serious hobbyist photographer that shoots landscape and city and street photography. And last year I switched from being a completely Mac person for a very long time, doing all of my creative work on Mac, to doing my writing and creative work on Linux. When I first made the switch, I was running my Mac right next to my new mini PC that I threw Linux Mint on. Since then, my desktop is now a Lenovo ThinkCenter, and I've added a Lenovo ThinkPad to that workflow as well. Both Lenovo systems are running Pop! OS. I started with Linux Mint and moved to Pop! OS a few months into my Linux journey. I think the biggest thing to think about before you make the switch is, why will you be switching? What are the reasons to make this switch? I can share with you a handful of reasons that are relatively common motivating factors on why people switch to Linux. One that's really relevant in the PC space because of the sunsetting of Windows 10 is reviving old hardware, quote unquote old hardware. There's a lot of PCs out there that aren't on the supported list for Windows 11, but still have a lot of life in them. And installing Linux on those gives them even more life. So reviving an old computer is a great reason to switch. Control over upgrades and updates on your system is an important reason. Mac OS and Windows at some point or another are going to find a way to, if not force you, encourage you to update your OS. Software compatibility or security updates. There's always some reason that they need you or want you to update on their schedule. With Linux, there are updates, of course, but you have a lot more control over OS updates, updates to your individual apps that you're using. It's all within your control of when and how these things get updated. Having control over your data and privacy is a huge reason. For years, we've seen many tech companies gather information from users, whether it's through social media or through the apps they use on their computers and phones or the operating systems themselves, and share those with advertisers. So advertisers could push advertisements out to you. Avoiding those advertisements is another reason. You'll see advertisements in Windows. You'll see advertisements on certain proprietary apps, things like that, that you will be, in general, freed from on the Linux operating systems. The next thing relating to data and privacy that we are facing is data to feed and train AI systems. Data has always been important, but user data now and all kinds of data is needed to feed and train these AI systems. They're going to continue to look to the end user to provide data on how and when and what you use your devices for. Being able to opt into that is extremely important. And having a Linux operating system, again, gives you control on which AI systems you want installed in your system, what models you want to give your data to train with, and whatnot. There's nothing inherently wrong with AI, but you should be in control on where your data goes and what it contributes to. One big motivating factor for me, and this is another motivating factor for a lot of Linux users, is contributing and being a part of the free and open source software world, the FOSS community. A lot of amazing developers who spend a ton of hours creating these really, really great software tools that allow people like me to be able to make this switch, to be able to create the stuff I normally create on a Mac on Linux. I'm trying to do my part to give back. Even though I'm not a coder, I'm giving back in different ways with this channel, with other things I'm working on, with money donations, and so forth. It's an amazing community. Each app, each distribution, they all have their sub-communities that are just as amazing as the whole. Okay, so in no particular order, here are some tips to help you in your journey to switch to Linux. One of the most important decisions you can make when you're switching is choosing the right distribution. So, as you may or may not know, Linux itself is the kernel, the core part of the operating system, and there are different distributions that take that kernel and create a complete operating system, a complete desktop environment. Each one of the distributions has its own style of how it presents itself visually, how it works, the details on the settings, the apps that it includes, things like that. There are a handful of distributions out there, and there is no one size fits all for everyone. So how do you choose a distribution? Well, an important general tip to choose a distribution for me is choose one that is complete. That one that has a GUI installer, a graphical user interface based installation process, so it's easy for you, something that you're familiar with. Many of the distributions have this, but one of the most popular distributions out there is Arch. And Arch is an amazing choice, but for the beginner, I advise you to choose something else to start with. And once you get familiar with Linux, then you can install Arch and move on to that. But if you're just starting out, Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Fedora, Pop! OS, and there are a whole bunch of others out there that I'm forgetting that people in the comments will help fill in the blanks, but there are a whole bunch of great starter distributions for you to choose from. But choose something that's complete, so it's a little more user-friendly, and that way you can get used to the idea of Linux in general before you tackle something large like an Arch-based distribution. Now, when you choose one, run it on a virtual machine, or you can install it on a USB drive. A lot of these will allow you to kind of test drive the operating systems just from booting from a USB drive. So you have the opportunity to test drive these distributions either in a virtual machine or on a USB drive before you completely install it by wiping out your Windows or even installing it on a partition on your drive. You can test drive it first to make sure you're good with the choice that you made distribution wise. Another thing is to research your specific hardware. Most likely someone out there has installed Linux or tried to install Linux on the similar or same computer setup that you have now. So I would Google your setup and with Linux and see what results you get. See if there's any known obstacles or barriers to some of the hardware that's in your computer, and that way you'll have an idea of maybe some distributions to avoid and that way you don't have some initial obstacles even getting it installed. For example, part of the reason I chose Pop! OS on this current system is I liked the fact that they had an NVIDIA specific installation, so it made it easier for me to install the NVIDIA drivers as I was installing the OS. That was specific to my use case, but you might have something similar. So know the computer you're going to put it on, know the specs, and Google that with Linux, installing Linux on this specific computer and so on, and see what results you get. That will give you a good jump start. Most hardware inside the computer doesn't have issues. A lot of the issues that people will have are accessories. For example, I have a MIDI music keyboard that doesn't have Linux specific drivers, so to get some of the extra buttons and features to work, you have to jump through a lot of hoops. So that's something that I was aware of, and that was something I was willing to accept, but you need to make sure that the accessories that you use, that you rely on a daily basis, that if they don't work, are you okay with that? And if there is a way to get them to work, just know how that can be done by, again, researching that beforehand. Another one of the most important tips that I tell people is map out your actual workflow on all the projects and things you do on a daily basis. So obviously everyone has email and a calendar, and most people have to-do lists. There's those things on the productivity side. But what do you do for the other stuff? Do you game? Do you write a lot? Are you creative like me and need photo editing and graphic design and video editing and tools like that? Know your workflow and what kind of tools that you need. Map out the software you use on your PC or Mac and start searching for what the Linux equivalent is of that tool. If you're a creative, I've started to make some videos on my channel. Search through my old videos and see if you found some useful tips there. If you're a programmer, there are an infinite amount of YouTube videos about programming on Linux. So just know your workflow, know the software that you need, and research the Linux equivalent. Because the great thing is, a lot of these tools on Linux, for example, some of the creative tools I use like GIMP, Inkscape, Krita, they're cross-platform. So if you're going to use those tools when you're on Linux, you can start using those tools now on Mac or PC. And I highly suggest you start doing that. Start learning the software tools specifically before you jump into the operating system completely. Because learning both brand new software tools and a new operating system, it's a lot to take on at once. And so it's good to ease yourself into this transition. And you ease yourself in by learning some of those software tools first. A lot of times you'll see one of two things in these videos that are on YouTube about switching to Linux. You'll see the person who tried it for 3 days in a virtual machine and didn't give themselves enough time and hate it because it's not what they're used to. It's not Mac or Windows specifically. It's not the same tools they're used to. So they hate it. They didn't give themselves enough time, and they give up and they make a video about how it's just not worth it. Then you have the other side who will polish over all the challenges and obstacles and say, it's great on Linux, come to Linux, it's all fantastic. I hope this is more of a balanced take because I love Linux. I'm super happy I'm on it, but there needs to be a reality check on a few things, and that's what this section of the video is. The biggest general idea is compromises will be made. There will be compromises in this switch for you, as there was for me. But what most people don't think about is that there's compromises in all these tools that we use on a daily basis, and all these devices that we use on a daily basis. The biggest one being data and privacy. We've compromised our own data and privacy for the ease of use of these devices and software that's provided to us, whether it's social media or whether it's the phones themselves or computers themselves, the browsers themselves. We've sacrificed some, at least, of our data and privacy for that. That's a compromise that we've given up for many years. The compromises on Linux are rarely that. They're more in the workflow category. You might compromise on the piece of software you do the specific task with, or you may compromise on the accessories that you use, or some of the details on how you manage files or whatnot. The compromises are relatively small, and they're usually something that you'll get used to. It's not always easy. is one of the biggest things to keep in mind. It should be obvious, but that needs to be emphasized. There will be obstacles at some point. Hopefully, very minimal if you've done the prep work, and like I've advised you to do, is ease into it, try VMs, learn the software tools that you're going to be using. If you've done these things, done the prep work, research your hardware, hopefully you've minimized these obstacles. But there's always going to be some obstacles at some point in your Linux journey. They may come up front, they may come in the middle, or years down the road. But the great thing is the community is fantastic, and there's a lot of answers and resources out there to answer those questions. But just expect some obstacles, and that's why it's always a good idea to not break your current system completely cold. If you can, run them side by side, either two partitions and dual boot, like I said, do a VM, or have two computers if that's a possibility, until you're ready to dive in completely and make Linux your daily driver. This is the unfortunate part for some people. The last reality check is that there may be deal breakers for you that make this impossible in your current state and situation. The most common one would be the software tools that you need. If you want to do this for your professional work, it may not be possible because your employer, the company you freelance for, whatever, may require specific tools that unfortunately are only made for Mac or Windows. So only you can answer that. Only you know your workflow. I don't want to tell you that everybody can switch to Linux and it's going to work perfectly in your workflow. It may not. For some people, there will be deal breakers. But I think the amount of people that is impacting is a lot smaller than it was 10, 20 years ago. And for some, there won't be deal breakers. There'll just be a lot more challenges in the switch. If you fight through those challenges, if you fight through the learning curve, and you fight through the murky waters of leaving your comfort zone behind to switch to Linux, you could find that this is a fantastic, fantastic space to live in technologically and creatively. I switched a little over a year ago, and I have no regrets. I've learned a lot of things that I wish I knew on day one, but that's part of the process, and I'm happy to kind of share those learning experiences with you in these videos. If nothing else, slowly but surely, every time I make a video, I think of something else I should have said or should have shared. So over time, I will share everything I've learned, and as I learn more, I will continue to share more. But for me, it was completely worth it to stay patient, to troubleshoot, to learn everything that Linux has to offer and embrace everything that it has to offer, and know that in order to make the most of it, I needed to adapt and understand what Linux is, what it can do, what these software tools that I'm choosing to use on Linux, what they can do, and so forth. And I'm in a great spot, and I think you can get there too. It just might take a little time. So whether you start with a distribution like Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Papa OS, or whatnot, and modify it to your heart's content, or you install it and leave it as is, there's no right way to go about this, but you will find your own path, and it will be totally worth it. I can make a whole other video on the things I love about Linux, and I'll probably do that, but I love the freedom. And that word freedom in this case has a lot of meanings. There's freedom from the bigger tech companies that are collecting our data and privacy and are controlling how often we update, how much the software costs, all these things, free from that, but also free in choice of distribution, free in choice of desktop manager and window manager and all the apps that you put on there. You have a lot of freedom to customize it, and that's really fun. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but I love doing that. And even though I've stuck with Pop! OS now for quite a while, I still love tweaking it and finding different things that I can do to make it mine. And that's just one of the reasons that I love it. And like I said, there's multiple aspects to freedom, but freedom from those companies and freedom of choice on making Linux my own. So I could go on, but I wanted to give some insight and some simple advice to people that are seeing these videos on switching to Linux and thinking about it based on all the things going on in the world technologically and with these modern computers. So if you decide to give Linux a try, leave a comment and let me know. And watch out for the comment section here, because there's a lot of brilliant people leaving comments, giving advice, and I'm sure someone can give you the answer if I don't have it. So thank you again for watching. If you're new here, I invite you to subscribe, like, and share with other people. It really helps the channel out, and I will see you guys again soon.